Listen up, there's a Democrats. You are faded, and lies and facts. Save our democracy for right-wing policy. Keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Never be a town, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
So welcome everyone to People for Democratic Party Reform. My name is Larry Taylor. If you would like to ask questions during the show, if you are watching the live version, you can type them into the chat window. Otherwise, you can listen to the show anytime later. I'm here today with my fellow parliamentarian, Keri Cabin. Welcome, Keri.
Hi.
Today, we are talking about what is going on, and specifically to meetings that you encounter within the Democratic Party of the United States. And so what we'll be talking about is why these meetings are different, your basic rights as a member, how the meetings are structured, what are the weird motions, and how best to learn democracy. Keri, tell us about what was your first time experience at a Democratic Party meeting?
So I kind of jumped straight into party politics about 5 years ago now. And I just pretty much just showed up at a meeting. I wasn't a member at that point, although I didn't know that. And there was very little structure. There was very little, like it seemed much more like a social club than anything at first. But then as we kind of went along and things started to come up, because it was, we were starting to gear up for the presidential primaries of 2016. There was a lot of, well, we can't talk about that, or it wouldn't be a good idea to discuss that, or we've always done it like that. And that all kind of struck me as kind of strange. And I had kind of vague recollections of parliamentary procedure and how meetings should go from, like student government back in high school. So I kind of started studying a little bit, and that's what led me to be a parliamentarian, was actually Democratic Party meetings.
Yeah, so Democratic Party meetings can be confusing, bizarre, arcane, and difficult to understand on how to participate. Sometimes it's this way on purpose. What makes it worse is when you are not wanted to be there. In 2016, we had a number of progressives, specifically supporters of Bernie Sanders, join the party here in our state. I was once chair of a county organization, and so I invited all the newly elected precinct committee persons, which is what we have in our state, to come to the meeting, thinking that they would be welcomed with open arms, because we had always said, where are the new people? Where are the youth? Why aren't they involved in the party? And so about 20 of them showed up, and it ended up being one of the most horrible meetings I've ever sat through in my life. The leadership lectured them on the importance of waiting their turn to get involved, and they were very proud about their procedures, and they were holding up boxes of index cards that showed how they their best known methods for contacting voters. And finally, after an hour and a half of this, one of them stood up and grabbed the microphone, and that's when all hell broke loose. And the meeting after that, they actually had to call the police. So, what you really need to understand about these meetings is that ultimately it's about power. And if the people in power do not want to let power go, then you're going to get these kinds of encounters. Yeah. So what you need to remember is the purpose of these meetings, regardless of what goes on, is that they are there to elect Democrats and to promote the values of Democrats. And elect Democrats, meaning people that believe in the Democratic platform to office, and the values of Democrats are what is encoded in the platform of the Democratic Party, both at the national level and at the state level. And these are, for many of us, very important documents, because they really define what makes us different than other people. And the struggle is then to close the gap between what the people we elect and what this document says, close the gap between those two things. So what makes these meetings, oh, go ahead, Keri.
Well, I just want to, you know, that's the aspirational purpose of these meetings, but the meetings actually have a concrete function. So like, you're not directly getting candidates elected in these meetings. What you're doing is laying the organizational groundwork to allow that, you know, to get that, to allow that organization that will empower people to get people elected. So one of the complaints that I hear in my county party a lot is, how is all of this nonsense with Robert's rules, which we're going to talk about in a little while, getting Democrats elected? And the reason it's important is because if you're not running your organization in a democratic manner and making decisions democratically, that and those decisions then set up success or failure for volunteers to show up and want to canvass, or volunteers to show up and want to work for candidates. And so if you don't have that organizational structure underpinning that, then you're not going to be effective.
And the other thing that you see is like what you see in our previous show about democracy in the land of Dixie. You end up with autocrats basically directing what goes on in the party, and it ends up being a priesthood and a closed society, as opposed to what the party in Alabama is now, which is opening and welcoming, and now is on its road to success.
Yeah, the former leadership here in my county really like to talk about how hard they all work and how much work it is, and nobody should be a PCP because there's so much effort to discourage people from getting involved in participating. So, but anyway, we'll move on to why are these meetings different? Most, if not all, I don't think I've run across any democratic organizations that don't use Robert's Rules of Order. So those are parliamentary procedures that protect your rights, and they guide how a meeting is conducted, and kind of establish the ground game and how you can get business enacted. Robert's Rules of Order is, most people like to talk about how complex it is and complicated, and it's really arcane, and it's really not. If you can get familiar with the very basic principles of Robert's Rules of Order, you're good. If you're a parliamentarian like Larry or I, then you can get into all the specifics and get into the weeds and all of the different scenarios you can go through and whatnot. But the basic principles are really logical, really straightforward, and you only need the very basics, and that'll get you through 99% of the time.
And again, the reason why these rules are in place is to protect your rights, because as we've seen in many of the Democratic Party organizations, is that they're really not interested in you and what you think, even though as democratic organizations, they should be run by the will of the majority. And so these rules are there so you can assert your rights when people are trying to take them away. So what are your basic rights when you go to one of these meetings? So your rights are to attend the meetings, to speak and debate, to make motions, and this means main motions and amending the motions and the other motions like referring things to the committee, and to vote. And so anything that curtails these basic rights of yours as a member are attempts to take your rights away, which you need to learn how to assert if that happens.
Yeah, these four principles, attending a meeting, speaking in debate, making motions, voting, like if you don't have, like basically if you lose one, it makes it much easier to lose the rest. And then eventually, yeah, it's a dictatorship where the chair or a small group of people are just making all the decisions and you're just window dressing. So it's important that you know what these rights are, know how to use them, and know how to protect them. So it's one of the main reasons why I'm a parliamentarian, and something that I'm really passionate about. And I do a lot of education for people on just these basic rights.
So right number one is the right to attend meetings. So if you are a member of an organization, you have the right to attend regular and specially scheduled meetings, and you cannot be barred from these meetings except through special disciplinary proceedings, which never occur, or generally never occur, or possibly special rules that are in the bylaws.
And so it's important to understand who members are. So here in Oregon, you are a member of the Democratic Party if you've been, the party itself, if you have been elected as a PCP, so a precinct committee person. In other states, they're called other things, but there's generally at least some sort of equivalent. I know in Washington, they're precinct committee officers. So those are the people that are actually members of the county or whatever your smallest unit is party. So just being a registered Democrat is not. Also, in Oregon, and I would presume in a lot of other states, the meetings of the party are open to the public. So anybody can attend, but you don't have any rights as a member unless you're elected or appointed to your position. So.
And one of your rights is the right to be notified of the meeting. So one of the ways they prevent you from being a participant is not to let you know when they meet. So some of these things can be hard to find. So if they, number one, they might pass a rule that they don't have to notify you, or that you have to give them an email address for them to give you a notice. This is hogwash. They need to tell you at least when the first meeting is, so you understand these other rules so you can get involved. And if you can't find them, if they don't tell you and they don't have a website, then you can always go to the state party. Well, not always. You can probably go to the state party and find out when your county party meets or when the state party organization meets.
Yeah. I know personally, I had a terrible time getting in contact with my county party. Eventually, I don't remember now how I found out when and where they met, and then just started showing up and asking questions like, how do I get involved? How do I get, and it was really become a PCP, how you get involved and how you become a member. But like I said, here in Oregon, we actually, in just a couple of weeks, are having our elections for our PCPs. So my name was on the official ballot. I got to, check the box by my name, which is kind of exciting. And so I will be officially a member of the county party again after this month. So it can be difficult to get involved or to find out how to get involved, and that's why we're doing a show like this, so we can help people. So.
And they can't remove you. They have. Oh, I'm sorry. They have to recall you from office, because if you were elected, they have to actually recall you through official process. So number one, if you're a member, you need to assert your rights. Right.
So back to rights. Your next right that you have as a member is that you have the right to speak. So you can speak in debate. You can also ask questions. Please ask questions. So I have chaired meetings where I've had members who be like, well, I'm going to vote no because I don't really understand what's going on. It's like, well, hold up. If you don't understand what's going on, then you need to ask questions so that I can clarify that for you. That's one of my jobs as a presiding officer, is to make sure that all of my members know what's happening, what they're voting on, and what happens if they vote yes or no. So if you don't understand, you should ask questions. And if you're getting shamed for asking questions, then you doubly need to ask more questions, and probably get some friends to go with you so that they can help support you, because you have the right to speak. And the only people that can take away your right to speak are the other members of the body. So so all of these rights can be abridged and modified, but only as by will of the body as a whole. So something to keep in mind, that they can't just tell you to sit down and shut up, because that's not how things work.
And they can't ignore you. So you might want to speak. To speak, you raise your hand or you stand up. At some point, if this is if there's no business on the floor, you can make a motion by standing up and being recognized, and you have to be recognized, but also it is the responsibility of the chair to recognize you. They cannot ignore you if you are a member and you want to speak. The next right is who can make motions. So the motion is the method by which you bring actions before the body for consideration. And it should be the body, the membership, a majority of the membership who decides what to do. So if you want to have an event, you stand up, and if there's no other business on the floor, you have the right to say things like, I move that we have a campaign kickoff party for so-and-so on August 3rd at 3 p.m. in the basement of the local VFW office. You have the right to make these motions, and you have the right to amend other people's motions. So if someone else makes that motion, you have the right to say, I move that we strike the VFW basement and replace it with the library conference room, or whatever you want to modify it. And people feel like this drags it down, but really what you want to do is you want to make the motion to the point where a majority of the people in the room can accept it.
Right. Anytime somebody tries to tell you that that you're slowing the process down, you might want to remind them that it takes two to argue about something, and that by them clogging up the debate by complaining about how much debate there is, they're contributing to that. The other thing that you can do is make what is colloquially known as procedural motions, and we'll talk more in detail about what those are. But basically, they're motions that don't directly pertain to what's being discussed, but they are tangentially related or interrupt the business for various reasons. But that's more detail. Like, if people want to know more details about that, we can talk about that. But it's not something that's important to know at the moment. So next right on our list of rights is who can vote. So members can vote, and members can always vote. And they have the right to vote on business discussed in the meeting. So anytime there is a motion on the floor, so if somebody says, I move that we do blah, 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 then you have the right to vote on that. And in fact, only the membership can decide on a motion that's on the floor. So if something is to be decided, then the members of the body are the ones that get to decide it. You can also vote in elections. So when you're electing county or state officers, things like that. And then again, on those procedural motions, which is a term as a parliamentarian I hate because it's not really accurate, but that's fine.
Also, the chair should not be making motions. In the absence of them being given power in the bylaws, they are there really to facilitate the meeting. And so this is why you sometimes hear a good chair saying things like, the chair will entertain a motion to create a committee to do such and such, or the chair will entertain a motion to refer something to a committee. That's because the chair does not have the power to do that. It's the majority in the room. And maybe everyone is in agreement, but still someone from the membership has to make that motion. It can't come from the chair itself unless they've been given that authority.
Right. So the next step, so that's your basic right. So then we talked about this a little bit, but finding the meeting. So as a member, if you are elected as a PCP or as your state's equivalent, then you should be notified of meeting date, time, dates, and locations, and in a timely manner. So that's usually a week or two in advance. If you have to track it down, it might not be listed on the internet. You can generally contact your state party, and they can tell you when your county meets. In some cases, it seems either deliberate or, I don't know if it's deliberate by design or just deliberate, it's difficult to find just by design or by just incompetence. But either way, the result is the same. As it can be really hard for somebody who's not already a member of the club to get into the club. And then once you are, then you've got to navigate this unfamiliar territory.
So now we're going to talk about what these meetings will look like, and this is for people who've never been to one, and the intention is to sort of describe what the flow of the meeting is, so you don't show up and are completely lost. I was at a meeting a couple of months ago where a youth showed up, and they had never been to a meeting like this before, and they sat there in a daze because all this stuff was going on and they couldn't track what was happening. So this describes how a general meeting runs. So when you show up, there's probably someone at the door to register you, and that's because there is a distinction between members and attendees. So as we were saying earlier, members get to vote, and so if you are a member, you are written down, and so when it comes time to vote, you have the ability to vote, and everyone knows that.
Also, when you're registering, there's jokes in Democratic circles that, you know, every meeting you go to, you have to fill in the registration form with your name, your email, if you're interested in volunteering and whatnot. Even if at some point you've been to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these meetings and they have your contact information, please fill it in anyway, because the person after you, we want them to fill it in too. But yeah, you're just be expecting when you go in to register that you're going to have to do it every time at every meeting till the end of time. And it seems really frustrating if you've been to a lot of them, but it's for the new people too. We want to get contact information for everybody. So it's one of those minor annoyances, but get used to it, and it does have a good purpose.
So you should find an agenda printed up somewhere near the door, and this tells you the proposed flow of the meeting. And so you should take one of these and refer to it as the meeting progresses. You should go in and sit down and take a chair wherever the membership is supposed to sit, and then someone should start the meeting around the published start time. So if you have a start time of 7 o'clock, then you would expect the presiding officer of the meeting to go up to the front of the room and call the meeting to order. So that's usually how these meetings start.
So most of these meetings, most organizations have a chair or a president, or what's known more broadly as just the presiding officer. They're responsible for starting the meeting, facilitating the meeting, keeping business moving, making sure everybody's rights are respected. They direct who speaks and who doesn't, and should explain why. So if they make a decision and you don't understand, like you let this person speak but not this person speak, or picked this person to speak before this other person, you can ask why that is, and the chair should be able and willing to explain to you why, what's happening and why. And if they're not, then keep asking questions and keep bugging them, because if you see something that you perceive as an injustice, then you want to make sure that it's is it just because you don't understand what's going on, or is it because there's an actual injustice? I've seen it go either way, and you want to be prepared one way or the other.
Just a couple of words about the agenda. So the agenda lists the items to be discussed during the meeting. The thing to remember is that the agenda is owned by the membership. There are presiding officers that get confused and think they own the agenda and that only they can change it, but that's not true. So a majority of the membership can change the agenda. It can also change any times that are listed on the agenda. So if you see the meeting time is scheduled to end at 8 o'clock and you know that it's going to take longer than that to address all the business, you can move to make the end time 8:30 or whatever you think is appropriate. You can change the order of business, so that is something that belongs to the membership. And you can also change what is discussed. So you can remove things from the agenda, or you can at least propose that they be removed, and the majority makes the decision on it.
Right. You can also add items to the agenda. So if there's something that's not on there that you think is important for the group to talk about, you can propose that it be added. And again, it'll be up to the majority of the folks, members present to decide that. So another thing, so I think a lot of people are familiar with like motions in general. Like if you've been to a city council meeting or have seen them on TV, when somebody says, I move to do blah, 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 they're familiar with that like basic structure. But there are some weird motions that pop up pretty regularly that you should at least have a vague notion of what they are. So unanimous consent, so a presiding officer would use this on something that's uncontroversial or something that they think is going to be uncontroversial. So they would say something, either they would say, do we have unanimous consent to do X? And if nobody speaks up, then it's assumed that everybody's cool with it and you move on. You might also hear somebody say, a presiding officer say, without objection, we'll approve these changes. And unless somebody objects, then you would, then it's assumed that the motion is adopted. You can, unanimous consent doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is 100% in agreement. It's just that that's not worth getting into and arguing about. But if there is an objection, then a good chair should just stop and then process the motion like they would any other motion, with debate and discussion and amendments and all that stuff. So another one, I'm going to skip call the question because it's a special pet peeve of mine, and I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes. So we'll come back to that one. A point of information. So this is when you want to know, you either have, you want to know what's going on, or you want further information. So when you're speaking in debate in the meeting, you're always speaking to the chair and not to other members, because you don't want a whole lot of crosstalk. But if you have a specific question for another member, you can request that you ask that person correctly. Another one that if you caught up a lot is point of order. So if somebody is doing something that you think is out of order, you raise a point of order, and then the chair says, yeah, no, that's not cool, or yeah, no, this is okay, we can do it this way. And they make a ruling on a point of order. So, and then another one, and we can, if people have questions, we can go into more detail, but another one is lay on the table. This one gets misused a lot. But basically, if there is something urgent that needs to occur in a meeting and you're in the middle of doing something else, you can lay that item on the table temporarily so that you can move on to the next item. Most people, when they say that they want to lay something on the table, they actually want to postpone it. But that's another, I won't get into all the details on that. It's another pet peeve of mine. But and then division. So generally in meetings, when you have a vote on something, it's just a voice vote. So the chair says, all those in favor say aye, and everybody in the room says aye. All those opposed say no, and everybody says no. If it's not clear, and then the chair will say, okay, the ayes have it. If you disagree with that, if you think that the chair was wrong, or it was too close to call, then you can call for division, and then it'll be usually a standing vote. So everybody who's in favor, you stand up. Everybody who's opposed, then they stand up, or a counted vote, or there's other mechanisms. So you can get a better, clearer view of which side prevailed. So then circling back around to calling the question. So this one drives me crazy. So to call the question means to end debate. It is actually a motion. So if somebody moves to call the question, then there needs to be a vote on whether or not you should end debate. It requires 2/3 majority to end debate, because that's one of the fundamental rights of members, right? So, but it gets misused. One, people will just scream out into the ether, question, or call the question, and then debate just stops. That's not correct. Or they will say, I call the question, and then this debate just stops, and they move on, or sometimes they'll vote on it. Anyway, it's all very confused. Or they'll call the question when nobody else is speaking in debate. Well, properly, once the question, when somebody has moved to call the question, then we have to have a vote and debate, blah, blah, blah. A good presiding officer will say, okay, that motion's out of order right now because nobody else wants to speak anyway, so debate is over. So if you want debate to end, just stop talking. You should only call the question if you see if you see 66 people standing in line to get up to the mic to to speak in debate, and we've already been debating about the same thing 77 times, then you can call the question. But if nobody else is standing up, then don't waste everybody's time, and don't just scream out. It's a proper motion. You need to be recognized and all that. So it's a special pet peeve of mine, and it's something that I advocate for perpetually. And I see we have a chat question. Is proposing something by acclamation the same as unanimous consent? It's really similar to, and it's often used about the same way. It's slightly different, but in effect, yeah, it's the same, kind of the same. So.
The main thing to remember, though, is that you are not an observer. You need to be an active participant in these meetings. And so if the chair asks for something to be approved by unanimous consent and you disagree, don't sit there and say nothing. Object, because as Keri said, if you say, I object, then they have to go through the full procedure and make sure that the majority agrees with what's being done. So don't sit there and let something go by if you are uncomfortable with it.
And if you're not sure, then ask. I mean, a good presiding officer should be more than willing to explain what's going on, and explain what's happening and what the results are of a thing. You can also ask the presiding officer too, like, how do I, if you want to do something, how do I do X, Y, and Z? Or what will happen if I try and do X? And they should be willing to kind of walk you through and explain what the results are if you try and do something in a certain way. That being said, there's lots of chairs that either don't know or don't want to know how to help members get involved, but that's a whole other problem.
Yes, you need to elect good officers.
Yeah.
So our final topic in this show is, what are the bylaws? The bylaws are the rules that govern your organization. So there's a hierarchy of rules, and so what we've been talking about today are the things found in your parliamentary procedure, and most commonly those are in Robert's Rules of Order. And so those cover everything as a default. Your organization probably has an adopted set of bylaws which modifies some of the things that are in the parliamentary procedure. So you can find things like how elections are conducted, or definitions of who the offices are. It should specify either in the bylaws or in somewhere in some of the rules when the meetings occur, because they don't just spontaneously happen. There has to be a call of the meeting, and hopefully the requirements for the call of the meeting are specified. So your chair just can't say, hey, we're going to have a meeting in 30 minutes and invite just their friends and pass business that they know that they wouldn't get away with otherwise. The main thing about the bylaws is that's where the power is transferred from the membership for convenience sake to, say, committees or to the officers themselves. And this is where the power grab happens. And so if you find that your organization has allocated too much power to someone else, then it's going to be a power struggle to pull that back, unless you have a chair or leadership that you have elected that is sympathetic to those objectives. And the final thing to remember is, as a member, you have a right to the current set of the bylaws. If you were in a good organization, you should be given access to the bylaws, either a physical copy or where they are on the internet, at your first meeting, so you understand the governing rules for your organization. If they do not give those to you, then you should go up to the chair and ask for them, and they have to give them to you. And if they don't give them to you, then you know that you have some underlying problems that you probably need to address in your organization.
Yeah, reading the bylaws is hugely important. I think a lot of people have probably never looked at their organization's bylaws, and you really should, because it gives you all the structure, and you can also kind of, it will illuminate if there's something wrong, if there's power imbalances, or things just don't seem to be working smoothly, then take a look at the bylaws and start there, because I'd probably say half the time it's because they're just not following their own rules. And so if you know what those rules are from the get-go, that can save you a lot of effort. If you can look at your bylaws and see that, oh yes, the executive committee is authorized to do X, Y, and Z. Well, then, if that's still a problem, then you can look at changing them. But at least you know that that's not something nefarious. That's how it's set up. And then it's just a good place to start. Most organizations' bylaws are not so densely written. If you see bylaws that are written in real legalese, that's probably a bad sign. Most of them should be in pretty plain English and relatively easy to understand. So then the kind of the companion to that, so you should know what your bylaws are, and then you should have at least some like basic knowledge of Robert's Rules of Order. So there is a new edition coming out. It's going to have a white cover and be all pretty and sparkly. Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, to the 12th edition. I would actually, if you're a beginner, recommend that you not get this book. It's a terrible book. It's hard to read. It's very dense. It's very complex. What I would recommend is the other book here. It's yellow, Robert's Rules of Order in brief. So Robert's Rules of Order is about 700-800 pages long. Robert's Rules of Order in brief is less than 200 pages long. It's written in plain English. It covers all of the basics that you need to know. It has lots of nifty scripts and charts and basic motions and things like that. So if you just want to know just your basic rights and how to do basic things in the meeting, read that book. It's going to tell you, most of what you need to know 90% of the time. If you're like me and Larry and you think that this stuff is really fascinating, then get a copy of Robert's Rules of Order and start really digging into it. But it is not an easy read, and it's not set up that you can just jump, like you wouldn't start at the beginning and be like, okay, how do I understand how to do stuff? It's not set up to do that. So whereas Robert's Rules of Order in brief is set up to be, I can just plug in, look and see, like, how do I make a motion? And it's just laid out, just like that. So it's much more accessible and much more made to be used on the fly in a meeting kind of thing, whereas Robert's Rules of Order contains all of our some knowledge of parliamentary procedure, but isn't always the best for on the fly reading.
Yes, it covers things like if someone wants to contest a election, what are the rules governing that? You aren't going to find the granular details in brief, but you will find very clear guidance on how to handle this stuff in the full document.
Yeah.
So that's today's show. This was just intended to give you a flavor of what you would find when you go to a meeting such as the Democratic Party holds that is supposed to be democratically run and is guided by the will of the majority. If you would like to help reform the Democratic Party, you are welcome to join the People for Democratic Party Reform, pdpr.org. I will put a link on there for people who would like to study parliamentary studies. And if you are interested in learning more about your rights and how to assert them, then that's a path that you can follow. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, where I do announcements on what is going on in People for a Democratic Party Reform, my Twitter handle is ltaylor_PDPR. And then on Facebook, we are at Democratic Party Reform. We will also be posting stuff there if you're in Facebook. Again, if you would like to throw a couple of bucks our way, you're more than welcome to go to the bottom of the chat screen and into Super Chats and throw a couple of bucks in our direction. We would greatly appreciate it. There's a bunch of infrastructure costs that go along with running organizations like this. And if we all chip in, as we learned from the Sanders campaign, it would be greatly appreciated. Is there any other questions that we should answer today?
Yeah, Larry, I just, speaking of fundraising, I want to give a shout out to Al Wolski and Density McCarthy for their Super Chat donations today. We really do appreciate it so much. It keeps the lights on, and you can donate, like Larry said, to uphillmedia.org or you can do super chat here, or you can just get with us and work something out. We really, truly appreciate that. We're going to ring the bell a little bit harder, folks, because we've got a lot of things going on. We've got new shows coming on board with Uphill Media. We have KORC that is in the works. What else are we working? CCTV still, Larry?
Yes, we think that we will be free to continue the production of Parliamentary Talk, so that will start up hopefully in June. And we have a very interesting topic that we are working on. We will be pulling apart what happened in the 2016 Nevada State Delegate Selection Convention. If you remember, that was famous for the YouTube videos that went viral. And with the police marching in, we have people from Nevada who will be able to talk about what went on in the background, and then we can talk about how things should have been done properly if it was actually a democratically run meeting. So that'll be Parliamentary
that
Talk.
meeting, the Democratic, the Nevada State Convention in 2015 was actually what prompted me to join the National Association of Parliamentarians and really study, because that was such a abomination of democracy and Robert's Rules of Order. I literally cannot watch that video without just getting tears in my eyes, because it was so unjust. So I'm really excited to work with Larry to talk about that and our guests from Nevada, because that meeting was really kind of the trigger for me that led me down this road of parliamentary procedure, because it's really important that we can't have just outcomes unless we have just procedures and just processes. So, and Robert's Rules of Order is so far one of the best ways that we have found to ensure that it's designed to kind of protect members and to protect their rights, and to let them be heard. And that's important. We're the Democratic Party, so let's make sure we have some democracy.
Yes, democracy is not a spectator sport. You have to get involved. Right. Otherwise, you will find that all of your rights have been taken away and democracy is gone.
Yep.
Anything else you'd like to add today, Keri?
I don't think so. Thanks so much to Larry for having me on. I'm sure I'll be back. And thank you also to Uphill Media for facilitating us. And you guys are great. And definitely donate to both of them, because they're doing good work. And I'm glad that I can help out when I can.
So next Sunday, we will be recording the sequel to this, which goes into how you actually do things when you get into one of these meetings. So today was, what do these meetings look like? What we will talk about in the next episode of this is ways in which you can make changes yourself. So how do you change the bylaws to pull back power or anything else you'd like to do to instill democracy in your organization. So please join us for that show.
The motions that we mentioned today will go into a little bit more detail. I'll be back next week to help you guys out. So talk about more detail about the motions we just kind of glossed over today. So
thank you for joining us today, Keri. Always a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that ends our show. Thank you so much for joining us today.